Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this session on service virtualization. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Charles Summers. I work in development, and I work for a company called Cellular. I'm responsible for SOA, service-oriented architecture, for an integration practice, and also I have several application development teams. And more recently, over the last couple of years, I've created a team that's responsible for service virtualization. Now, US Cellular is the fifth largest wireless carrier in the United States. We're a $4 billion company, and we service our customers. We have around 5 million customers nationwide. So why am I here, you may be asking? Over the last couple of years, I've spoken to many people, many leaders of different companies who are in different industries, and they're all at different stages of trying to introduce service virtualization within their company. Even though they're different, I identified that there's one problem that many of the companies seem to be facing, and that seems to be a problem around how to gain adoption of service virtualization across the enterprise. Many of the companies, it boils down to whether the testing organization can actually gain engagement from the development organization or vice versa. So sometimes it boils down to something as simple as that. So we were able to overcome this challenge by adopting a different approach. We were able to adopt service virtualization across the entire enterprise within US Cellular, which includes across all development, across testing, our training organization, and also across infrastructure. And we even was able to obtain adoption from several of our large vendors and large partners that really benefited from the services that we provided. So as I describe our journey, I tried to demonstrate the improvements that we made in our PKIs, which we refer to as EQI, which is efficiency, quality, and infrastructure costs. And I hope that this session will give you a fresh insight into what it would take to do likewise in your company. So we'll start looking at the dependencies or constraints that we faced for each project that we were working on. And then we'll plan to gain independence from those. How we establish these capabilities, that's what we'll move on to. Go into the details of what we did to make sure that we were able to not just establish, but grow this capability within the company. Also, we'll share some details on execution, what value we were able to realize, and also what further initiatives that this enabled us to move towards. So first, let's get started with the constraints. So I want to take you back before we implemented service virtualization. And I'll take you back a few years where we were successfully transforming our entire IT landscape. It was a 5-year program, and it was to replace our operations and our business support systems. Now, if anybody's in telco, you'll understand that's basically the majority of what we have in the IT space. We also made major changes in web, mobile, and virtually everything else that we were working on. Now, it was a huge effort. My team alone developed hundreds of web services on the ESB. And there were hundreds of APIs that were developed across over 30 third-party vendors that were hosted off-site. So to make this happen, we understood that we would have to put a number of our large initiatives on hold to be added to a backlog, waiting for the new IT platform to be implemented. And so once that happened, and once we delivered, we knew that we would need to catch up fast and get up to speed quickly, otherwise we'd be left behind by our competitors. So at this point, we were developing more products than at any time in our history. We were doing so on a brand new and very complex platform. at greater velocity that we had seen before, and also with more vendors. So the bottom line, we needed a new approach, because how we were doing things, it just wouldn't work. We had such tight deadlines. We had so many different constraints that were holding us back. And it was creating situations where, for example, to start testing, just start any form of testing, functional testing, for example, we would start on average 2 to 4 weeks late. That's a big deal. Now, sometimes it was 6 weeks, sometimes 8, but on average between 2 and 4 weeks. Also, when defects were discovered, it would normally block various test cases. Let's say that a defect was found in a back-end API, and we were trying to test the entire flow. We couldn't test that flow because of that dependency, and many of you probably experienced the same. And also, we had very limited test coverage. And so we had a situation where we could only really test sunny day scenarios. We also had to reduce costs. And so adding more resources, for example, new environments that we needed for all the projects that we were working on, that wasn't an option. So let's start looking at the pain points that we experienced, and we'll start with system availability. Now, getting back to testing delays, largely there were delays because parts of the system were unavailable. And also testing was blocked because defects were found, as I mentioned earlier. We had a limited number of environments, and they were too expensive to build out. And so many projects were competing for the same resources, and so they were having to be delayed. We had a similar situation with our third-party vendor systems. We had very limited access. And that in itself caused delays and prevented full testing, because sometimes if a third-party system wasn't available, we would have to avoid those test cases. And it sounds very unusual. I'm sure other people have gone through that experience, but it was our reality, and we had to face it. In terms of test data setup, we didn't have a test data management solution, and so it was very manual, and so that caused delays, and also invalid tests too, based on bad data being created. Now, the test coverage, not only were we paying a high cost to our vendors for them to develop stubs, those stubs weren't function rich. They only covered a few test cases. And that led us to only being able to test the sunny day scenarios. And so defects remained undiscovered in all of our pre-production environments. Excuse me. In terms of performance tests, those were delayed too for the reasons that I stated earlier. And then finally, wait times. Because there was various parts of the system that were unavailable, various teams within development and testing were having to wait. There was significant idle time. So in summary, we needed a solution that performed excellent against our KPIs, again, EQI, efficiency, quality, and infrastructure costs. So let's look at the plan that we came up with. So this was the intention for US Cellular after service virtualization was implemented. We effectively had to allow testing of incomplete systems, end-to-end testing, full-blown testing, all forms of testing on an incomplete system. We had to provide unlimited environments available always and at zero cost. We had to replace all third-party systems and environments, and also we had to imitate all test scenarios, especially rainy day scenarios. So we had our work cut out for us. It was certainly a very challenging time of my career. But on top of that, we had immovable constraints, which can be summarized as follows. We couldn't impact anything because there were so many projects, so many people, so many constraints, so much going on in the company. We couldn't impact any project, whether it's time, cost, or risk. We couldn't impact any person. It was an almost impossible challenge. And so, we knew we had to do something different. So we did identify a solution to all of these constraints. and selected a product to achieve all of these. And as you can guess, we chose CA's Service Virtualization product. So to describe how we were able to remove those project constraints, we can look at a very standard architecture that we have at US Cellular. So from left to right, we have some standard UI layer, and then in the middle tier, pretty straightforward. We have the ESB running a variety of different web services. We have on-premise APIs, and then on the back end, it's more third-party vendors. I have listed just 8, but we have many more than that. Now, what we tried to do was try to remove all of these constraints that were possible. And so we started with the third-party vendors. We virtualized every service that we were previously paying for. So everything that we were paying for pre-production, we didn't have to pay for anymore. So that effectively meant that every service was always available, stable, it was consistent. We eradicated all costs, and there's many costs associated with this. There's environment build-out, hardware and software costs, there's maintenance and support costs. Some of our vendors have a per transaction fee, we eradicated that, and also a tiered fee. Instead of having to, by increasing testing, go to a different tier and paying more, we actually reduced the tier and paid less. And we also reduced development costs because we no longer needed to pay vendors to create stubs. We did the very same thing for the ESB layer and also for our on-premise APIs. So this meant that we were truly able to shift left. Testing could now start on time. Defects no longer blocked our test scenarios, our test cases. And if a defect was found, we would simply update our gateway, add a new endpoint, point to the virtual version, and then continue testing while the defect was being fixed on the real service. All test scenarios were now being able to be covered, and defects were now discovered earlier. And in some cases, we were able to make a 100-fold decrease in cost. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the 10 by 10 principle, but it's 10 times more expensive to detect defects in tests than if you found them in dev, and likewise production and test. And we identified that there are a number of defects that we wouldn't have found at all until we got to production that we were now able to discover in our dev environments. Because we were able to shift left, we were able to allow with unit and integration testing the ability for the development teams to be able to make a real call to what they thought was a real service, but in fact it was a virtual version. Now, based on all the constraints that we had several choices of how we engaged different teams. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on this, but just to say that the 3 main models are push, which is top-down, pull, which is bottom-up, and the more collaborative way of doing it is peer. Now, based on the decision we made to go with a peer model, we also had to do it in stealth mode. We had to just engage with our leaders in peer important teams in order to not take them away from what were their priorities at the time. So we had to kind of work more in a stealth mode. Now, I prefer a much greater partnership and collaboration. And coining the Michael Jordan quote from yesterday's keynote speech, if you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up. Figure out how to climb it. And we did figure it out. Even though we had a lot of challenges, we figured out how to do this. And it gave us an unexpected view on how easy building this kind of capability really could be. We adopted what I consider a standard approach. We started with building a core team, which included defining roles and responsibilities, trying to identify the main consumers of the service, the main beneficiaries, and that made it easy for us to identify the adoption leads. Now I'll go into what they are in a later slide. We then laid the foundation. Now this really started with an engagement with CA, which they refer to as a value release. I would highly recommend it if you're starting your journey to engage CA on a value release. It really helped us to implement the solution that we needed, no more, no less. They helped us to identify what we needed to begin with, what we needed in our future state, and also they helped us to understand the standards and the best practices of other companies that had implemented service virtualization. So that gave us a foot up when it comes to creating our center of excellence, and it enabled us to establish some key artifacts so that we can be successful in these capabilities for years to come. We then tried to build momentum, and that really starts with education. We have a number of different methods of educating and providing awareness to many different teams across the enterprise. We focused on finding pain points, because what we decided very early on is to try and add value immediately if we could. We wanted to build momentum by demonstrating the power of this tool. And so we met with a variety of different teams across development, test, training, etc. And we were able to identify some very key pain points that were causing some significant constraints. We also looked for opportunities, especially the high-value, low-cost opportunities. You could call them quick wins. We were looking for something to really inspire people to, one, take notice, but two, to see the power. And what we did, we communicated those wins often, and that brought about engagement from many other teams that previously weren't interested in this capability. Moving on to execution, we virtualized all our existing web services immediately. We did it in stealth mode. We had one conversation with a test lead, and we asked for permission to update their endpoints in the gateway so that we could record all of the services that were being executed in a scheduled regression test. It was a full regression test. It tested every single test case that was possible for all of these services. And within a few hours, we had created a virtual service catalog of all of the existing services. Then we provided that to our development and our testing partners, and they were immediately able to benefit from this capability. It literally took a few hours to do. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with service virtualization, but there's several different methods that you can actually virtualize a service. If it's an existing service, you can use a tool to record. For those that are in design or being developed that aren't available yet, then you can configure the tool so that the service can be virtualized, but it would take a day or two to do that, depending on how function-rich the service is. And we did that in order to remove project constraints of in-flight projects. And finally, communication. Now, this isn't necessarily the 5 phases. A lot of these were intermingled. And so we definitely communicated often. That was very important. We communicated as per our communication strategy, which included communications, different types, at different levels of the organization. We communicated things like metrics, return on investment, etc. Excuse me. Now, when you create any new capability, it's always good practice to try and identify what your target state or final state looks like. And so in parallel to working out our approach, we also were able to work out our target state. It helped us carve out a path that we could demonstrate this capability for years to come. We also defined levels of maturity, and those we plot against a standard capability maturity model like CMMI. So let's talk about the foundations that we laid. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but just pick out some that were very important. In terms of implementation, working with CA, we were able to identify the solution strategy, the stack, the infrastructure, how it was made up, what types of virtual service environment we would need, everything we really needed to implement. In terms of process, we started trying to identify an operating model. We created key artifacts like the opportunity tracker, which is very simply when an opportunity arises, we document it and we prioritize it, etc. An ROI tracker, which speaks for itself, and also communication strategy and Center of Excellence charter. In terms of education, it's all based on the service virtualization portals and our knowledge base. And in terms of adoption, really the focus there was aids for federation so that we could help development and testing teams to federate this and adopt this for themselves. We created a virtual service catalog, made it searchable, and also created usage reports. In order to do this, we had to build a core team. And I'll start with the business champion. The business champion is the strategist, the person that identifies the value that can be added across the business, looks for pain points, and prioritizes the types of service that are being virtualized, provides a strategy on adoption and maturing this capability. And that's my role on the team. There's also service SV leads and architects and administrators, and sometimes, like in our case, those roles can be fulfilled by one person. And then there's adoption leads. Now, we had to identify who would be the main beneficiaries of SV. Those were the ones that would be the main consumers, and we identified for us, it was development, test, and infrastructure, and later on training. And we were able to collaborate with those teams and identify an adoption lead for each one. Now their role specifically, they're responsible for adoption and also federation in those key areas. We wouldn't have been as successful as we are today if it wasn't for partnership with CA. And there was a gentleman that keeps going backwards and forwards, Cassiano. He was a significant help to us building this capability. And we put all of this into the context of all the stakeholders. What really helped us was to obtain an executive sponsor and executive stakeholders. When they understood not just the capabilities, but when they saw the reality, the savings that we had made, then they really got on board very, very quickly. And so we have a full set of stakeholders who are very much invested in the success of this. Next, I'll talk about the build out of the infrastructure. So we decided on 3 different types of virtual service environment, and those are separated into functions, as you would imagine. So there's a development VSE, and that's for the development testing that's represented on the right-hand side. Excuse me. There's a performance VSE, and also several functional VSEs that are used for non-performance testing and training. So let's take a look at a simple execution diagram. So we talked about the pain points from earlier on. We built a very simple intake process. We wanted to make sure that each team that could benefit from this, they could actually request our service very, very easily and very quickly. Mentioned opportunity tracker earlier, and so the SDLC, we made changes to that to align that with the service virtualization capability. So from initiation right through to testing, there were various milestones that were built in so that we ensured that service virtualization was used. We provided some governance models, including estimation and scoping, implementation plans, focusing on prioritization, deployed and publicized, and then finally, we captured all of the metrics and updated the ROI tracker, and then communicated it out. We had a variety of different communication tools that we used. The main ones I want to call out are the ones that we communicated ROI and the value added. We communicated quarterly via a newsletter. The newsletter included a number of different things. Anything that you would really want to know about service virtualization, over a period of time, you would gain it from the newsletter. We communicated monthly via our ops reviews that went to very senior leaders, and also real-time via our service virtualization portals. We also attended and presented at tech summits, and we have them generally about once a year, and we were able to present to hundreds of associates, from individual contributors right up to C-level executives, and we were able to demonstrate the capabilities and the benefits that we've been able to achieve. From an educational standpoint, we had different methods to communicate depending on where we were going. We would get in a car and drive to a different organization within the company, and we would do a roadshow. We would present to different teams, different organizations. We also did brown bag and lunch and learn sessions for any teams that we identified that we could federate this capability to. And also, CA helped us establish an inter-company group that we refer to as birds of a feather. And I represent US Cellular, and there's a number of other leads that we basically share our stories. We help each other identify, based on the challenges that we've had, how we've been able to get over those challenges. So let's get to the value that we've been able to realize. And it's really based on 5 different areas. We reduced wait times, we provided greater availability of services, we shortened test life cycles, significantly reduced infrastructure costs, and increased test coverage. So there's a lot of information there. I've had to speak very quickly. I hope that's been okay for everybody. At this point, I actually want to bring up the member of my team, Vibash Pathik, who's going to take us through the value that we've been able to realize so far in this capability.
Hi, hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the value of freedom, like as Charles mentioned, we implemented service virtualization after implementing, it's been like the 3rd year for us, and within this 3rd year, like we lack in capturing the metrics. That is one thing we need to improve, but still with whatever metrics we have captured, the minimum numbers are like efficiency wise, we have almost saved 40,000 hours with an quality improvement of more than 50%, and the total ROI which we have achieved is $15 million within the 3 years of span. So as you can see, it's spread across development, testing, infrastructure, and training environments. And I would like to call out few things which we were able to achieve. Is we were able to virtualize more than 80% of third-party vendors and APIs, and on an average 60% increase in the test coverage, and infrastructure wise minimum like $5 million in the test environment infrastructure savings. There are many other common use cases which we were able to achieve. You can see, I will not go through all of them, but the majority of them was to replicate and certify the production issues. The major challenges we were facing were like the test and development teams were not able to replicate the production issues. So using the virtualized services, we built virtual services in such a way that all those impossible scenarios are being mimicked, and the testers are able to test the defect Uh, I'll talk through this use case. Actually, this is with the help of service virtualization and the XSLT. Uh, we virtualize the SAP environments. Like we had very limited access to the SAP environments, and it almost cost us $500,000 to set up one SAP environment. So what we did is, using CA's help and the XSLT support we had, we built up this solution, and now we have 37 test environments, SAP test environments, and we can build many more with a zero cost associated to that. So this is one use case. What it did is, it helped the testers. Earlier, the testers used to take 40 minutes to submit an order or do some execution. Now it only takes within 1 minute. So that's the kind of saving we have achieved through service virtualization. The last one I would talk through is the training environments. What it did is, it enabled the training associates to improve their quality, which in turn helped the company to provide better service to the customers. So we have like 6 dedicated environments which are all connected to our virtualized services, and with this the trainers are like providing good quality. So what initiatives service virtualization has enabled, this is what we are looking into the future, but we have already making our mark into, have already made our mark into agile, DevOps, automation. We are still in the initial phase, but we'll get there. And the next things we are looking is continuous delivery, continuous testing, and iterative development.